right, good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. It's wonderful to see so many of you folks returning and all the new folks that have arrived since we started this relationship with NOAA and continue with all the good work. So thank you again. My name is Jennifer Goupil. I serve as the Chief Resilience Officer here at ASCE. I'm also the Managing Director of the Structural Engineering Institute. So I took the title of the session that was given to me, and I wanted to bake it into the real reason why we have our eye on the prize. And being the Chief Resilience Officer, I'm going to throw that word in wherever I can. So we're going to talk about why modern codes and standards improve community resilience, and then understanding the ASCE standards and code cycle in the building code for climate risk reduction. So that's a big, long title. I also want to get more words on the page. Did I win? Okay, going forward. Okay, I'm going to take it from the top a little bit here because I know we have a mix of folks, NOAA folks, GSA, thank you for being here. Other folks from other agencies that are not civil engineers, talk a little bit about ASCE, and then how codes and standards improve our community resilience. And then we'll get to the big topic that I want to talk to you about on process and cycles, and then partnerships for advancement. Okay, so high level here, I want you all to look at this picture. Stop emailing, take a look at this picture, and what do you see there right now? This is what civil engineers do every day, okay? This is your community, this is mainstream USA, and actually all around the globe too, not just USA. But civil engineers design and build and maintain the foundation for our modern society. So you can see a few of the words there that match the infrastructure on the screen: buildings, roads, bridges, drinking water, energy systems, seaports, and airports. Basically all the infrastructure for resilient communities right here. So as Tom mentioned earlier, at ASCE, civil engineers hold paramount the sustainable protection of the health, safety, and welfare of the public. Really, that's why we get up every day and come to work, for that ethical obligation to the public, and that's what we serve. So as we move into ASCE standards and what we're really talking about here, when the next big event happens, a variety of factors will really determine, and the risks will determine which structures incur the most damage. And on the photo here on the left-hand side, it came across a little bit dark, I think, when we moved it over. Maybe it was like that in my original, I don't know. But this is a flooded community, something that we all have seen almost every day. When you look online, you wake up in the morning, you hear about the news, somewhere is flooding right now. North Dakota, I think, right? Everywhere. What's going to happen? So every day, as Dan and others have pointed out, we're working proactively to mitigate those risks to the community. One way that we can do that is through our design standards, along with codes, research, and post-disaster assessments. Okay, I'm going to take a little bit of a walk through really what ASCE documents are. Dan talked a little bit about this MOP. What is that? Standard, what is that? This is the pyramid of publications that we produce here at ASCE, kind of starting on the foundational article and then working yourself all the way up through MOP, which is a manual of practice. It's a non-consensus document, if you want to think about it that way, that's really a best practice. This is what luminaries in the field are doing. This is really best guidance and practice. It is, you see the little, oh, I got a little messed up. The little blue ribbon panel that's off to the side there, it has an extra set of eyes on it just to make sure that everyone's cool with that document. And that goes out there as a manual of practice. A very good document to use as an owner community for best practices. But really the gold star of what we produce at ASCE are standards. So that's the world I live in 9 days out of 10. And that's where I'm going to spend the rest of our discussion really talking about standards, how we, who was it? I think Ben, maybe Joe also talked about syncing some of the schedules for funding, schedules for developing data into the schedules for standards. So that's what we're going to talk about. I'm not going to go into it, but it's a third-party ANSI accredited process that we run here at ASCE. That's a different presentation, not for today. I do want to talk about the definition. This is a generic definition that you get off of the website. Standard is a document that describes the processes and methods that must be performed in order to achieve a specific technical or management objective. So really generic definition, but for ASCE, what our standards means is that the minimum criteria for performance, whether it's building performance, infrastructure performance, that's what we're going for, that minimum criteria. And again, zing, what do we do that for? Improve community resilience. That's what we're working for. Not just to write the document, not to put it on the shelf. You'll help me say that a couple of times. I see you looking at your watch. I have a timer right here. I'm going. So why do standards matter? This is kind of the hierarchy of documents. A standard really defines how to design and construct a variety of infrastructure or buildings. Now we're talking like in the built environment world. Standards rely heavily on research and data. We're going to come back to that as it relates to what we're talking about here with NOAA data, NOAA research, and getting that in. Those standards are then referenced into national and local codes, building codes. When I talk about my standards in the Structural Engineering Institute, we are mostly in vertical construction, but of course there's horizontal. There's all kinds of infrastructure, and those codes will define if, when, and in what manner the construction is permitted. So the codes adopt the standards. And then finally, the local building official needs to adopt and enforce those codes. Again, why? To protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public. That's why we're doing this. That's the hierarchy. So continuing on our theme, why are standards important? I think we already talked about this at ASCE. We develop all kinds of standards for all the institutes, which are really like the technical expertise within the broader society. So water resources, Brian's sitting here, Copri's here, Jen's here, SEI, geotech, things like that. These are 3 examples. There are many. We have almost 80 standards at ASCE now and growing with our standards office. I'm going to talk about the standard in the middle, ASCE 7, very near and dear to my heart. That's the one I know inside and out. I've been developing that document for over a decade now, gone through 3 cycles with it. It's a heavy lift. We're getting there. So real quickly on ASCE 7, if you're not familiar with that document, it was revised most recently in 2022 as part of our regular update cycle. And I highlighted that in red because we're going to talk about regular update cycles here for a little bit and how we align that. And then I bolded some of the hazard topics that we're going to talk about in some detail later this afternoon in our breakouts. And that's what a lot of us will dive into, that technical expertise of the document. What do we know about wind? What do we know about flood? What do we know about snow or rain? But really it's the full package, and getting it adopted into the regulatory environment is where we actually make a difference. So why are standards important? This is one of my favorite cartoons that I drew, I can't even remember, 10 years ago, something done, and you're going to see it a lot. So why are they important? Particularly with 7, we take the hazards, all the environmental hazards, and then we bake it in with some performance. So the committee comes in and they really look at economics. What are we doing with these provisions? And constructability. Can we actually do this? We bake it into 7, and what comes out the other side, hopefully safe, reliable structures. While the committee is really good at the performance piece, the hazard piece does not come from the committee itself. Who does that, you ask? Why can I not advance here, Erica? Thank you. Thank you. So all of you do that. All of our federal partners, ASCE does a little bit of self-development for our data, particularly in snow, and partnered with NOAA for tsunami. But you can see the list there. I have the key code at the bottom of who all these agencies are, but basically everyone in this room, NOAA, NIST, FEMA, US Army Corps with CREL, and then ASCE will come together for these hazards. All of those hazards, as I think Joe mentioned, are backwards facing. We look at the historical record. Starting many years ago, 2018, 2019, we started thinking, how are we going to start looking forward? And so we started the process within SEI, within ASCE 7, of saying which environmental hazards are going to be influenced by a changing climate. We selected these ones, and these are the ones we're focusing on in the current edition of ASCE 7, which is 2028, for what's going to influence those hazards going forward that we need to know now, and we're going to start working on that. And again, why are we doing that? to improve community resilience through climate risk reduction. So how do we get that data into the document, into the code, into the jurisdiction? I'm going to walk a little bit faster through this. So we start at the front end of the cycle, I will say, way upstream from the standard development process is the development of the data. Organizations like NIST, NEHRP, USGS, we're going to hear from them tomorrow on how exactly we do this in a little more detail. But for today, we take all that hazard data and information, and we uptake it into the standard, just as Dan was describing earlier this morning. But we're not happy with that document just being done and put on a shelf. Now we need to get that document adopted into the I code, to a code or a regulatory environment. 7, it happens to be the building code, but it could be any regulatory environment for a standard. And then to do that, of course, you have to understand their cycle. When do they accept proposals for change? How do we interface with them? What is the cadence of their projects? And then after the code is developed, it's still not good enough. We don't stop. We never stop. Then we need to get it adopted by the jurisdiction. And in this country, we do that state by state. There are no federal building standards except for manufactured housing, because that's considered a product. But for buildings, it's state by state. So we have to go to every single state house and get that adopted. We're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the other end. Okay. Real briefly, I like this cartoon because once you finally get it adopted by the jurisdiction, that's when it becomes law. That's when it becomes the requirement. That's when we're really making the difference in the community, once it's adopted. All right, timeline, research to use. These documents on the left, the data that comes from, the NEHRP authorization that Caroline talked about, that's a very well-funded, and we're going to talk about this tomorrow, well-funded mechanism for getting the research done. Their eye on the prize is to get it into the standard. There's other documents, though, that are done by all of our colleagues at NIST, FEMA, also creating some of these documents, and they're on a, 1 to 3 to 4-ish timeline, year timeline. Then we have the standards, and for an ANSI accredited standard, that is a 5-year cycle. ASCE 7 we do on a 6-year cycle because that aligns with the building code. The building code is the very next document. That's every 3 years. We get to play in that sandbox. And then finally, the states or the jurisdiction are on their own timeline, their own schedule. Sometimes they're every 3 years to align with the code. Sometimes they're twice that. So it depends on where they're at with that. So if you take that data, you pump it into the standard goes in the code goes to the jurisdiction, bam. How many years are we talking? 10 years. Everybody look, 10 years. It's a long process. So we take our long process, marry it up with Ben and Joe's long process, and that's what we're going to talk about tomorrow. How do we actually back up the bus far enough so that we are getting that data through? Okay, real quickly. If we have ASCE 728, that's what we're working on right now. That's what Dan said. We caught that train right as it was leaving the station. We got a little bit into 728, little bit. What we're looking for is the next cycle. So again, 28 by the time it cycles all the way through to the jurisdiction will be 2032. Now we're looking at big numbers. Well, now we want to talk about NOAA data. We're going to talk about this in more detail tomorrow in the breakout tomorrow. How do we sync those schedules? We have NOAA data. We're going to keep our eye on 2034 ASCE 7, not this current cycle, the next one. How do we do that? So if we want to talk about, and again, my little star here, day 2 panel session that we have tomorrow includes some of my colleagues, USGS, FEMA, NIST, and NOAA that have worked with us at ASCE 7 for decades. How do we Let's see what lessons we can learn from them about how they married up their programs to the schedule to get those data in. But basically what we're looking at, we need the next set of federal data by 2028, 2030. I took a note when you were talking, Joe. You're planning right now in 2024 for fiscal year 2027. That's going to be executed in 2028. Ding, ding, ding. What do we got here? 2028. I think something's working. I don't know. So if we can get all those other ducks in a row, we might have a shot here, people. But this is for ASCE 7. There's lots of other documents. Brian can tell you about the water resources documents. We have geotech documents that are ongoing. So this is, again, this example for 7. We're broadening our scope here, as Dan mentioned earlier, to look at other similar timelines for other documents. Okay, so if we do that, say we're successful, we get the appropriation, we get the data, we get it into 734. Now it hits the street in the nice old year of 2038. That's a long time. So this is what we're up against. The challenge for us is time. And there's a lot of things we can do between now and 2038. And we're going to cherry pick those where we can. We're going to write documents where we can, guidance documents, MOPs, which don't go through the rigorous standard cycle maybe, but are very valuable for the public. All right, how am I doing? Okay, so here are our takeaways. This is my last slide. The adoption of modern building codes and standards, improve infrastructure resilience. That's the prize that we're looking for at the end of the day. That's what we're going for. ASCE partners with federal agencies to advance our environmental hazard development in order to consider current and future conditions for inclusion in design standards. We talked about it's a very long cycle, but we can get there. We need federal investment. We talked about that little picture with all my arrows and all the agencies coming in. That's real. That we can't do that. Even with our committee of 900, which is on ASCE 7, we can't do that hazard part mostly. So I say federal investment is really needed. The NEHRP that Caroline mentioned is critical and very important. NWRP is authorized but not appropriated. Been through that many cycles. I have this really cute little NFHRP because my colleague John Gargiola and I dream about having a national flood hazard reduction program at some point. And we've shopped that around, like stick it, throw it against the wall, see what sticks. So I put here, what can NOAA do? Where can we work within these established programs? Where can we create new ideas? And then overall, it's an all hands on deck situation that we have here for climate risk reductions to improve community resilience. And that's what I got. So again, here's our pretty picture. Thank you so much.
Any questions? Yes. Okay, go ahead.
I have a question on 728. Has the train left the station? Because I understand they were somewhat conservative in looking at future condition, and I could be wrong. But, the climate is changing fast, as you see around us. So there's nothing we can do about that. Is that correct?
Okay, so for a little background, the 728 committee is actually working on a new chapter called Future Conditions, where they are going to be making some assumptions, using what data we have, and also using some engineering judgment to get to a place where we can provide the practitioners and the jurisdictions with something to use in 2028. Will we have all the nice science from NOAA? No. Will we get there? Yes. And that's the way 7 is developed all the time. So I was thinking about it when, or many of our documents actually, I was thinking about it when Dan said we need to be aware of the appropriation schedule, but we can't get hung up on it because we're going to develop that document whether we have the data or not. It just depends on what we can get our hands on and how the very, very smart, talented committee members can come up with and get through the main committee and then get adopted into practice. So we're going to get somewhere. Where that is, we just quite don't know.
If I may add, engineers are trained to design regardless whether the state of science is there, right? We are trained to do that. We have to go back to physics and math and so on. So what we've done, if you look at the practice in the state of New York and Florida and so on, people design for a changing climate. After Storm Sandy, all the infrastructure reconstruction and so on accounted for a changing climate. The city of New York and so on. There are many examples in California and so on. What they've done in that case, they really improvised, right? So basically, they relied on manuals of practice, maybe such as 140, internal documents that they created. They beefed up the margin of safety and so on. So we can't stop the show. We have 1.8 trillion industry, the construction industry, that has to be every year, right? We have to build those projects. So the standards are lagging behind, but we will get them in line with the rest of the practice. Thank you.
Bilal, can I just make one quick
please.
comment?
Yeah.
You know, I've been in this discussion many times over the last few years, and every now and then when you start thinking about, well, the standard isn't going to have an impact until 2034, it's a bit of a downer, right? But we have an opportunity now, if we develop with NOAA and the other federal agencies, the products that will feed into that process, as soon as those products are available, engineers can use them. So I tend not to think about where we're going to be in 2034. Again, I'm focused on what can we do in the next 3 years to enhance the science, enhance the data that engineers can use to exercise their expert judgment. So the standard is driving the process because it's an organized process, but anything that we develop along the line between now and 2034 or down the road will be available to support engineering practice. And I think that's what we got to stay focused on. The standards are important without a doubt. They're an organizing principle for our work, but it isn't a limitation. So don't let the fact that it's going to take 10 years get in the way of your energy. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jennifer.